Will you want to answer that while we start?
Yeah, possibly. I think Ramesh, the early bird offer, we get answer your question first. Yeah, I think mother tongue is great. I think it really reinforces learning for abstract matter far more easily, because language is a medium for learning, and if you already know language, then obviously the content is going to be much easier. And we do see people who with vernacular medium of instructions, they do have very strong intellectual skills. Unfortunately, the job market demands English as a skill, not just as a communication language, but as a skill, and that's where the challenges start. When that changes, I think you can learn in any language. It doesn't matter. Language should not be a barrier to learning. But I mean, today, if you don't get a job and if you don't know English, and that becomes the reason for not getting a job, that's where parents are petrified that English नहीं पता है तो बच्चा सीख नहीं रहा है.
And on top of
Unfortunately,
that, you
that's the
have
job market speaking, not really. It's got nothing to do with learning.
and a lot of the learning content, a lot of the coding languages, a lot of other related stuff is also in English, unfortunately. So, like if you don't pick up English as a skill, it becomes difficult. And this is again a oft repeated problem. Should it be mother tongue or English? Frankly speaking, in early childhood, really doesn't matter. Children can pick 5, 10 languages. I mean, my kid could talk 3 languages because a neighbor is talking Bengali, somebody talks Gujarati. They just pick it up. So children in early years can be, you and I can't do it today, but a 5-year-old can pick 6 languages if they're just exposed to it. They don't even need to be taught it. So at the end of the day, if you can expose them to the language, I think they will pick it up. So why should it be this or that? It should be mother tongue and English and maybe into other languages also. Children have the capability in early years to take it.
Hi everyone, I welcome you all to HITS Meet on the topic Affordable Early Education, the solution to India's learning poverty. I thank every one of you for attending the webinar, taking precious time out of your busy schedules. I would first introduce the moderator for the session and also talk a little bit about the aim for the webinar. We here have the moderator Mikin. He is the co-founder of Log IQ IDs, an organization dedicated to improve analytical and critical thinking in school children. As an alumnus of IIT Roorkee and IIM Calcutta, Mikin has always been very passionate about education and improving learning outcomes and started the organization 5 years back after his 10-year stint in the investment banking with Merrill Lynch. Journey has been fairly successful. With currently, they are working currently with 600 schools in India and UAE and run a completely free of cost logical reasoning program for kids. The aim of the series, what we do at HITS, is to kind of bring people who are trying to solve complex problems and take and help them explain why they're solving it and what are their observations in this area. So I would request Mikin to introduce the panelists here and also guide the topics.
Sure, thanks, Sandeep. Thanks a lot for the introduction. So great, guys. I think we have got two very eminent people, who have got a lot of experience in the early childhood education space with us. So, I mean, let me just quickly introduce the panelists. So we have got Mridula Sridhar with us. She is the co-founder of Credo Early Childhood Solutions. With over 15 years of experience in the early education space, she's very passionate about learning during the early years and also understands the importance of right curriculum for children entering kindergarten. This need and a deep understanding of the Montessori products led to the creation of Credo Early Childhood Solutions in 2013. She is an instrumentation engineer and MBA from IIM Calcutta, and she basically leads the team that researches the curriculum, learning approaches, school furniture, and training for the teachers, and creates a very attractive and effective learning environment for children in the age group of 2 to 6 years. I mean, she has been leading this team for a while and has seen amazing results, from what they have implemented at several preschools as well as K-12 schools in the kindergarten space. We also have Manikanandan Krishnan with us. He is the co-founder of Credo Early Childhood Solutions and also a director in Kiddo Enterprises Private Limited. He is an entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience, specifically in the early childhood education field. He has done a lot of toy design and manufacturing as well, which is what his organization Kiddo Enterprises kind of leads. He is passionate about early learning and strongly believes that good quality, fundamentally foundational early learning can eradicate the learning poverty which we face in this country. He is an aerospace engineer from IIT Bombay and MBA from IIM Calcutta. He joined the early education business in 2004 and created a world-class manufacturing facility in Bangalore, capable of rapid prototyping as well as mass manufacturing of wooden toys. He designs the functional aspects of the toys and ensures they enhance the learning process for young minds in the most effective way. So I think with this, I would really like to welcome our panelists, as you would have kind of got it from the introduction. Both of them have extensive experience in the early childhood space and are probably best placed to talk about the topic we have today, which is affordable early education, the solution to India's learning poverty, right? I mean, this topic is very, very close to me. I think as I was talking with somebody, kind of, he talked about that India, unfortunately, is rapidly developing into a nation of test takers, right? I mean, if you really look at it, it's a pretty deep statement which talks about how a lot of us view education as, right? A lot of us as parents or other stakeholders, probably the only objective which we judge education or the quality of education is by the marks. I mean, including some of our boards, right? Where CBSE or ICSE would want to look at how the school has been performing in terms of marks. And in all this, we all miss out on the importance of early education and the foundation which early education brings in. So I think since we have got two people who have got extensive experience in this, let us just kind of open this topic, with certain questions which we would want them to kind of talk about, and then let them lead us through this journey or through this discussion as we take it through. I think before we get into this, there is a short poll which we wanted you all to kind of attempt. So I think Sandeep would just release the poll to all of you, and you could just attempt that once. We would release the results immediately.
Yeah, the poll is active now.
Yeah, the poll is active. Great. So the question was, what should the children below 6 learn? I think clearly creativity seems to be the largest one, where I think most of you agree on the fact that creativity is extremely important for that, and so is socialization. I think literacy and numeracy and critical thinking somehow takes a little bit of a backseat compared to some of these parameters. A very interesting set of results, and I must say definitely surprising for me when I look at them. I think let us just basically start with one of the important question to the panelists. So Mridula, given your experience, would be great if you talk about it. I mean, we have a very deep topic today, kind of early education, and I mean, we are kind of talking about how do we achieve better objectives. So would you want to give your thoughts around what do you think should be the objectives of early learning, early childhood education, and how does that pave the way for achieving better outcomes later on? What is the importance which we should kind of look at?
Yeah. So thanks, Nikhil. Thanks for introducing us, and great to really be happy to be here and talk about one of our favorite subjects. It's always very exciting to talk about this subject. Yeah, and the poll was really interesting, and this is it gives us a lot of thought process into what people want for their children, what people think is important for children, and there's no correct or wrong answer. They're all critical skills. But I'd just like to go over the order of the skills perhaps that children develop in early years, which is kind of very critical. We have often heard this statement. I know it's thrown around a lot on television and in a lot of places these days that most of the learning happens below the age of 6. So this is factually correct, and it's proven by neuroscience, proven by psychology, proven by all areas of science. When we say to a large extent, the brain sort of develops the ability to learn really below the age of 8. So it's what is famously called the use it or lose it, experiences that define the child. So the brain sort of gets hardwired to a large extent in the early years based on the experiences that the child goes through. So for example, if you had a lot of exposure to Japanese, then Japanese gets sort of coded into your mind, and then any time in life later you want to learn Japanese, it becomes very easy. So whatever you expose children to early in life, they sort of start learning that more easily later on. Now, often in the 0 to 6 or 0 to 8 even age group, it's a time when parents don't really take too much seriously. They sort of, say, abhi to chota hai, khelne do, and especially, this is true across all social structures. And suddenly in class 5 is when we wake up to saying, Arey, Abhi, now it's time for studying, which is a problem, because by which time the brain is already hardwired in a lot of ways. So in fact, I mean, left to me, if we should probably be doing the reverse, where we help children learn more in the early years, and then later on in life it becomes so much more easier. If you look at lower income communities, tuitions and dropouts are rampant in class 5 onwards. Children from higher income communities have had the advantage of having exposure at home to learning, so it's not so bad. Now, when it comes to early learning, typically we divide it into four categories, five actually. Four are critical and one sort of gets added on. These four areas of development are the physical, language, the cognitive, and the emotional. The creative is the fifth area of development, which sort of comes in little later, and it was very interesting to see that was on top of the poll. That sort of comes in when the other four have started kicking in to a large extent. So these four areas of development are rather like a balanced diet. So the way you have proteins, carbohydrates, vitamins, and so on, none of which you can do without. You need them all, but you need them in different doses. And the interesting thing is you don't do them one after the other. So you don't eat only rotis one day and only sabji one day and assume your body will digest it. You need to have them all together. And that's when the food is also tasty, and that's when your body digests it better as well. Same way, even in your early learning, you need to have all the four areas of learning happening simultaneously. And possibly I'll play a video after this to show how that happens. Um, Coming to foundational literacy and numeracy, it's one of the key things that we emphasize on in early years. It's not just about reading or doing maths. So the minute you say foundational literacy and numeracy, acha maths sikhane wale ho, you're going to read and things. It's not just that. These are important because these are life skills which help them gel into community, which help them build their intellectual base. So these are things that is what the child needs to sort of get started. So even for your social development, even for creative development, it's very critical that you have foundational skills in place first. And that's why today the world gives so much importance to foundational literacy and numeracy. So very simple objectives for me. If you say define high level objectives, what would you want a child to learn? I would say numeracy in nursery. We would love for every child to have learned to count up to 20. Every child must know to add in LKG. Every child must have a concept of what multiplication means in UKG. Similarly, in language, it would be sounds of letters, three-letter words, forming sentences and reading sentences in UKG. So on that note, I'm just going to share a small video here just for the audience to understand what.
Mridula, these are pretty very ambitious targets, right? I mean, and it would be amazing if you think that kids can actually achieve these kind of targets.
Yeah, they can. And like Mani mentioned, kids can learn up to 21 languages is the theory. 21 na sahi, 5 hi sahi, but they have the ability. We tend to confuse stress and pressure in our mind. We feel ki we are stressing children. Challenges are a part of life, and children love challenges. They love pressure. The thrill of falling off the swing and jumping from there. It's a huge pressure, but they enjoy it because it's challenging. But when that breaks down to stress, saying, no, you've got to do this 20 times, then it becomes stressful. So anything that you do which the child enjoys in our minds is always something that's achievable because the child wants to do it. And it's any child can do it. It's not just, these children can do it, but those children can't. Every child has the capability to do it given the right inputs, given the right environment, and which is what we keep talking about affordable early education. So I'm just going to share screen for a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I'm on. Here's a child. So I hope you got to see that video.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, very short clip, and that's how simple it is. It's as easy as jumping on the swing. So if we make multiplication out to be easy, it is easy. It is in our heads whether we think of it as, oh, my child has to learn multiplication, or hey, my child has to learn multiplication. And it's really easy as the child likes playing with water or playing on the swing, honestly.
Great. No, I think that was super helpful. I think we completely agree with you, right? That I think foundational, the main objectives of early education has to be literacy and numeracy, right? I mean, numerical ability plus their ability to read, write, understand basics. That's quite interesting. I think before we kind of dwell into this a little deeper, there's one thing which has been which kind of caught my attention, right? I think Mani kind of talks about a very interesting phrase saying, learning poverty. I think Mani, I would like to understand, your thoughts on what do you really mean by learning poverty in India, and why do you say that we have learning poverty in India?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Again, like quickly, I'm just going to share screen. I hope I'm better at this.
Yeah,
And just give me 2 minutes. Can you see it?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's a simple slide. I mean, in one slide, it tells you exactly what we mean by learning poverty. We all in the affluent sections of society don't come across this very often. Children struggle to do basic subtraction in fifth standard. There have been enough studies that have, been done. ASAR is the most common report that's quoted everywhere. They do the study every year about thousands of children across the country, lower income groups, middle income groups. They test children on various abilities. First standard child can't do basic single digit subtraction, and that's kind of the majority of the children in government schools and budget schools can't do it. Budget schools do fare a little better, but most of the children struggle to do basic three-letter word reading in fifth standard. Even if it's like in the local language, in the vernacular language, they struggle to read sentences in sixth standard. Ninth standard children can read stuff only at the fourth standard level. There's enough and more reports on this across the country on how bad the learning situation is. And as Mridula mentioned, the problem is always that we wake up too late. We end up waking up at fourth standard and fifth standard and say, "Oh my God, now the children are not learning. There's not enough learning happening." And we try to push hard. And when we try to push that hard at that time, children start dropping out. The dropout rates in this country are amazing. I mean, even pre-COVID, we had the kind of the worst dropout rates in the world in both in fifth standard and ninth standard and 10th standard because children have not got foundational learning in place, and suddenly you are suddenly introducing, for example, factorization in fourth standard, and children don't know even basic multiplication and division, and you've like suddenly skipped a lot of things, and pushing the child to now write exams. Now you have like, oh, you till fourth standard you don't fail, but suddenly in fifth standard there's the pressure of failure. So many other things that come into play. So the idea is there is a learning poverty. First of all, literacy itself is a challenge in this country. You have about 60 to 70% literacy in this country. On top of that, within that, the dropout rates are so huge. I mean, when you say literacy, the basic criteria for literacy are also very basic in our country, right? So there is a huge amount of learning outcome disparity out there. We don't see it in the affluent section of society, but working with a lot of affordable schools, budget schools, we see it in the lower income category. It is a poverty out there of a different kind. We know only poverty in terms of economic sense, but this is a terrible poverty because this is what leads to economic poverty, right? At the end of the day, good quality education is very, very important. So that's why the coining the term learning poverty, because and I didn't coin it, I think it's coined by UNICEF. It is actually a significant problem in developing countries like ours. And I think we are, like you rightly pointed out in the introduction, our focus on education is in test prep. You're getting tech companies getting billion-dollar fundings on test prep, but there isn't enough going into the fact that to actually do well in tests, you need to have foundational skills in place. But there's not enough going there. So more and more pressure on children, and more and more dropout rates, and not enough children succeeding, and more failures. And you end up having a situation where the children are not going anywhere. I mean, that's the situation we are in today. So that's what I mean by learning poverty, and it's a huge problem out there. Um, and the solution is in the early learning. A solution is the fact that there have been enough reports, or that ASAR itself talks about the fact that you need to have foundational learning in place before you go into higher learning in place. NEP talks about it. The first time a government report is talking about the importance of early learning. So I mean, we were very happy to see that because we've never seen it before in any of the government published reports on how important early learning is. So they've given a category called the first 5 years up to second standard, which is so critical. UNICEF talks about it. Every company in the world talks about it. I think the developed countries are doing well because the foundational learning is so strong there. I mean, we might talk about the fact that India's education system is good, and I'm not denying it. We are all products of that. But I think the fact of the matter is, abroad, there is so much focus on early learning. Even in the pandemic time, every developed country, the only thing they said was, we may shut down 10th standard, we may shut down 12th standard, we may shut down 5th standard, but we will keep our preschools open. We cannot afford early education to suffer. So many countries from Australia, England, France, France took it out of the last measure. They shut down schools last week. So there's such an importance to early education that it's kind of lost, and it's not there.
Right. No, I think fair point and very well explained. I kind of agree with you on that. That we at times miss the importance of early childhood education, which in turn kind of leads to very bad outcomes for us later on. And I think all the outcomes which we keep talking about kind of stem from the fact that you have not really not prepared a child for basics. So it's like I mean, even something like as simple as a game, right? I mean, if I really kind of push a child to play a game which is extremely difficult for him or her, he is bound to lose interest, right? I mean, the same thing probably happens with education as well. And then anyway, there are enough barriers to kind of prevent these kids, or at least for these kids to think whether they really want to go and I mean, invest in educating themselves, or the parents thinking about whether they want to invest. So I think if you don't really have the right foundations, if the parent don't see the results in early childhood education, it's very difficult to convince them or to get them to kind of invest further in the education for the kids. I kind of completely agree with you, and I think you guys are right on track on that. But I mean, having been in this space for like close to 2 decades, if I may say so, right? I mean, because while you started this in 2004, I'm sure you had experience in the early childhood education space even before that. I mean, what are those 3 or 5 pointers which you would want our stakeholders in the early learning system to take kind of to take home to improve the outcomes, right? I mean, how is the current early learning kind of system driven in India? How are they kind of distributing or kind of delivering the outcomes, and what do you think needs to change? What are those 3 to 5 things you think needs to change for us to kind of improve the outcomes?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is need to understand the delivery mechanisms and then say what each of them are currently doing, so that we understand what needs to change in each of them. I'll just quickly summarize the kind of delivery mechanisms we have today, right? So, and we have to break it down into 2 components. One is the government sector and the other is the private sector. And how is early education happening in each of these places? So in the government sector, typically you have Anganwadis. So majority of the preschool education or rather early childhood care, and they call it early childhood care. It's not preschool education for them. It's ECE. EC, early childhood care is ECC is the focus there. So that is driven through Anganwadis, and these are primarily centers all over for example, in Karnataka, we have 63,000 Anganwadis spread across the country. Spread across the state, and you have every taluk, every village having an Anganwadi center, mainly focused on nutrition. So the majority of the focus of Anganwadis is actually not preschool education or foundational literacy, numeracy. Very little goes into that. The main target for them is to ensure that children are well fed, the vaccination is taking place. Those are the social things that we need, and that's extremely important. The health aspects need to be taken care of. In fact, if you look at the order of priority, before education comes health. If a child is not fed, he can't read. I mean, he can't study. So you need to have that taken care of. So the Anganwadis are primarily focused on that. You have the entire system geared towards making sure children have at least nutritious meals in the day, are having a good quality vaccination program is being fed through. And some Anganwadis in a lot of places we have seen, we have actually supplied to Anganwadis in the past. They even work as community centers. They are actually the center of the entire village. In fact, there'll be a borewell there, which their village will come and actually fill water. So it becomes like a community center in a lot of villages that we have seen. So the Anganwadi is not focused on foundational literacy, numeracy, early childhood education is not a focus. There it's purely making sure at least we did take care of the basics. And that needs to change. The government does spend a lot of money. There's a program called the ICDS, Integrated Child Development Scheme, which is one of the largest funded programs in the world. But unfortunately, huge leakages and not enough going into actually ensuring that the children are getting what they need to get. So that's one part of it. That's Anganwadi centers. And second is the government schools. So you have a lot of government schools and corporation schools that run nursery centers. They actually have nursery, LKG, UKG in this corporation schools. Again, focus is purely on rote learning. At the end of the day, you have the traditional blackboard kind of system where teachers standing on one side and say A for apple, B for ball, and children are just repeating after that without any meaning. Pure focus is on rote learning. So that's the second. So the government sector, to be honest, has not succeeded very well in India in terms of delivering education, not just in the early childhood space, but I think in the higher classes also. Delhi being an exception nowadays, where they've actually done a good job. Majority of the country has actually not been able to deliver in the government sector. In the private sector, predominantly you have 2 players. You have the preschools that are there all over the country. Number into lakhs of preschools across the country. Every nook and corner nowadays, especially in urban areas, you have preschools. Not the pandemic, you don't have them anymore, but you did have them prior to the pandemic. So these are the primary places where you have education delivered. But again, the focus there is again play, art, dance, music, which is all good. But the core is the They are more like a recreational facility for the way I look at it. And parents look at it as a place where they can leave the child for 3-4 hours so that they can focus on other things and the child is taken care of. They more act like daycare centers rather than actually acting like preschool or centers of education. So the word school itself is a not used there very often. You call them play homes, you call them, all kinds of names, daycare facilities, but primarily the job of preschool education, very few are doing. There are a few Montessori schools and etc. who actually attempt to deliver high quality education in this space, but again, they are only in the premium space, not too many in the lower and lower income space. You have hardly any preschools delivering quality education. And then you have the K-12 schools. So again, in K-12, you have two categories. We like to categorize them as the premium schools and the budget schools. Most of the K-12 schools again follow like government schools traditional form of learning. It's again blackboard, rote learning. Teachers sitting on one side, children on the other side, and whatever you do from first to 10th is actually done in early years. We believe early years completely requires a different form of education compared to what you do in your higher classes. A traditional one-sided, monologue from like I'm doing now, where I just speak and then understand. I hope that the entire audience gets it. Is not the way it works as far as the children are concerned. We need to move away from that, and that's the fact that all K-12 schools, majority of them, very few actually invest in early childhood because their focus is again numbers in terms of ensuring that they have A to Z sections, especially in the premium segments of the society. The lower income have their own challenges because their focus is to ensure 10th standard results are good. That's what parents demand out of them. So their focus is their early childhood kind of gets neglected most times. So it is in India, the early childhood as a sector needs to reform completely. I think Mridula will have a lot more inputs on what we need to do, but I think fundamentally, whatever we have as institutions to deliver this right now are not succeeding and have not been able to deliver.
Yeah, so to add to that, in terms of the sectors, I think Mani's described the classification of the schools very largely. These are the various places where learning is delivered for children between the ages of 2 to 6. So what can we do to improve learning in these years in these schools? These sort of to broadly summarize, there are three simple ways that we can effectively increase learning. And the first and the most important one, I think to a large extent, what we like to call the concrete to abstract theory. So in most cases, especially where this rote learning is high, we are directly jumping to learning as a concept via books or via pictures, or sometimes in the preschools via song and dance or play. Now, all of these, we look at them as supplementary learning. So if you wanted to learn a piano, you wouldn't just, do a song and dance, or you wouldn't see a video. You would actually get onto the piano and you would play, and then you could watch a video later, or then you can write notes in a book later to actually make sure that you've understood how to play better. But the first thing you need to know, whether you learn to cook or play the piano or drive a scooter, is to get on it, fall down, make your mistakes, and do it practically. And that practical learning component is completely, evasive in our school education right now. So even in engineering, when you do practicals, you finish the theory and then you go to the lab, which is kind of completely reverse of how you learn anything else in life. So for us, the primary thing when we look at learning is, first you have to do activity-based learning. First you have to do your practicals. Make all your mistakes. There's no better way to learn than to fail. There's no better way to learn than to make mistakes. So make all your mistakes. Get it out of the way. Start understanding where you're failing. Once you're there, then you can add any number of supplementary learning mechanisms, which is what we call the theoretical or the abstract learning. Then you can have books, you can have coloring, you can have rhymes, you can have creative things, you can have all kinds of things. But what activity-based learning does for a child is it brings the child's attention to the purpose of the activity. Like we saw in the multiplication video, the child first did multiplication with the material, then the child can do it on the blackboard. That's not a problem. But you can't start with the blackboard first and expect the child will understand multiplication. So, for example, you want to give your child palak, then you have to, you can't keep telling the child palak is good for health, so you eat. वो 2 दिन के लिए काम करेगा. After that, it's not going to work as logic. You guise it under different things. You make palak in a way that the child likes, and then the child will automatically start having palak. It's as simple as that. Same way, if you, you give the child work, you don't tell them you have to practice writing, but you create an activity that will help develop writing skills, then that's disguised work, right? That's what play does. And this is what concrete learning is about showing the child a purpose in a way the child enjoys, but at the same time, you're building some skill for learning. So that's number one for us to say, every school should have a practical to theory approach that will resolve 80% of the problems that children go through in terms of learning. The second thing is self-learning. Acha, so many people have to do, so many children have to do practicals. How is the teacher going to manage? Should I be teaching every one of them? So we have to move away, far, far away from this teaching method. We're talking about learning and not teaching, which means self-learning is very, very critical. The child will do, the child will make mistakes, and the child will learn by making mistakes. And the teacher is there to facilitate this learning. That's what the teacher needs to, sort of adopt the position of a guide, and that's what really the Montessori philosophy is all about. I think the third most important missing component in our country is the lack of parental awareness. We are very often told when the child is born, we give you a milestone chart. At this age, the child should be this height, this weight. This is what has to happen at this age physically. But nobody's telling you mentally, what are the expectations. You don't even think of it because children develop naturally. But a lot of times, especially even in communities where there are a lot of children, although your family tells you physically what to expect from the child, they don't tell you intellectually what to expect. So I think it's very important for organizations like maybe UNICEF or the government or so on to promote awareness of what should I expect from my school. When my child comes back at the age 4, should my child learn to read 3-letter words? Yes or no? It's a simple question like that. So learn to walk, learn to speak, learn to read, learn to do maths, all of which should be milestones which are clearly given to the parents. I think it will make all our lives very easy if we know what to expect. The problem is we don't know what to expect a lot of times. I think this would be like a 3-point summary for me: go concrete to abstract, promote self-learning, and increase parental awareness on what to expect.
Great. I think thanks, guys. That was super helpful. I think, one point which you talked about is something which I also very firmly believe in. So I believe that the outcomes are a function of three things. One is your genetics, I mean, genes, whatever they are. Second is your process, right? Which is, I think, probably what you touched upon, the way you kind of start with an activity-based environment. And the third is ecosystem, right? Which is the environment the child kind of stays in. And I think it's very surprising that not just in early childhood education, I think throughout our education, we pay very little emphasis on the ecosystem part, and a lot of emphasis on genes, right? I mean, I have heard so many times that ye to born intelligent hai ya ye to bahut intelligent, right? I mean, which is such a big misnomer, I feel. I mean, things which people can pick up.
Unfortunately, when they say born dumb, it's even worse.
Yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, we are so quick. And I think that's again where ecosystem comes into play, right, Mani? Where I think there are times when parents put that pressure on a child and they start branding him. I mean, we can potentially, I mean, a lot of schools do invest in educating teachers about not to brand a kid. I mean, I don't know how successful they have been, but I see very, very few schools or preschools putting in that effort with the ecosystem. In fact, that reminds me, there's a school called Eklavya in Ahmedabad, run by one of the IIM Ahmedabad prof, Dr. Handa, right? I mean, he basically has a session with the parents every 15 days, where they essentially train the parents, where they take parents to what was taught in the school in a very brief summary and what they can expect, how they can behave with the kids at home, even in cases where the kid is not able to perform. I mean, I found that to be an amazing outcome. I mean, I kind of spent a week at his school just to understand how he runs that, because I really look up to how he kind of manages the entire process. And I think one thing which you talked about really strikes me, right? I mean, this piece on educating parents and making parents an important stakeholder in the process is going to be very, very critical. Shobhan, you want to add something?
The problem is also the fact is that a lot of this works, inherently in the higher income communities. But then the problem gets into how do you kind of do it on a mass scale. I think that's where we need support, and that's where we need a lot of support, a lot of awareness to be built in from organizations. So we can't do it as an independent organization, as a private organization. We just don't have the capability to do it. And importance of all this, for example, I think 2 years back there was this initiative from NDTV, I think, with one of the companies that they launched the sports thing. How important is sports and how important. And it's a great thing. I thought at least somebody is talking about all these things, right? I mean, why should we have sports as a part of a curriculum? But again, the fact is that you talk about sports as a curriculum. For example, what do you do in physical education in early years? For example, the child can't jump. What are you going to do? Are you going to make him a long jump champion if you can't even jump basic? Even jumping is a skill. Like Madhula says, a lot of these things happen in early years. And if you don't do those foundational physical,
Yeah,
emotional,
I think
intellectual.
once the parents sort of start asking these questions, I think schools will start thinking about them also more. I used to keep telling money like the polio program happened across the ki do boond. It's the same thing. Just the 3 years of education can change your life. There has to be a
Absolutely.
radical message going out to the parents saying this is what can change the child's life forever.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I'm sorry, I'm kind of belaboring this point, but I mean, I see a lot of parents today look at education as an expenditure, right? I mean, but if I really look at it, if there is one investment which my dad did, that was my education, right? I mean, probably the investment which would have given him like I don't know how many times returns, right? So I think we all need to kind of do all of these things from the government side, where they need to communicate, convince the parents about the importance of education, and do it. I mean, fair enough.
And
Okay.
just
Yeah, yeah,
one more
sure, go ahead,
point
man.
here, which is important, is I think which Mridula touched upon, is the fact that a lot of times we hear this in the market saying, oh, you know what, if you want to radically change education in this country, the only way it can be done is by actually transforming teachers. And I kind of agree that, I mean, yeah, you need to ensure that teachers are on board and they are the guys who are delivering the education that you really need. But unfortunately, the problem is always going to be there, that when you're dependent on teachers, especially in the public domain, it's even worse, right? So the problem is, and this is something Mridula and me, we always discuss internally in Credo, how do we productize education? How do you ensure that education can be productized, and teachers are not teachers, they are facilitators. I mean, they should be guides and facilitating, and the environment and what you provide in the environment ensures that children learn. Children are not learning because the teacher is there. Children are learning because the environment is there, and the teacher is part of that environment facilitating it, but not driving learning. Because that's where the fear comes in. That's where there's a lot of push, and then the enormous pressure on the teacher to deliver. And then when they don't deliver, it is treated as a failure on their front. So I think productizing education, and we can talk about it endlessly. I mean, that's our favorite topic, but it's part of it is what Mridula talked about, concrete to abstract, is like, how do you take concrete education to the child? How do you get practical learning to the child in a way that they can self-learn, they can learn through their own mechanisms rather than somebody else pushing it through? And that would be the best form of learning, because that learning, it stays with you for life. You learn stuff on your own, you do stuff on your own, it stays with you for life. You don't need somebody reinforcing it. If maths is taught to you as a skill, if 2 plus 2 is taught to you as a skill and not as a rote learning, it will stay with you for life. So
Absolutely. Great. I think there's a question which one of the attendees has asked. Guys, we'll just wait till the end of the session and then we'll take all the Q&A. Do keep sending in any question which you have. We'll definitely take it up towards the end. I think this was helpful summary, right? I think the takeaway in terms of how we can go about increasing, I mean, or improving early childhood education. But I must say that no discussion on education, specifically in the post-COVID world, is complete without the role of technology in it. Right. I mean, I was very surprised that, I mean, when you talk of the outcomes or the takeaways for any school or, anybody kind of involved in early childhood education, you did not really talk about the role of technology and how technology could improve, or, should it be leveraged enough, or what will happen if it's not leveraged enough, right? Because traditionally, technology has been looked upon as something which most of, let's say, not so budget schools, or let's say some of the more higher tier schools or tier one schools will kind of use, and not the government or the public schools or the budget schools will use. So how do you really look at the role of technology in early childhood education?
yeah, I mean, technology is like, like Vidla wanted to say this. I keep saying this often, right? Technology is like pizza. I mean, it's good in smaller doses. It's good when it's like there. You can't have it every day. It's not good. But if it's given in small doses once in a while with the right combination, it's exciting for the child and it actually delivers what it needs to. But you have to be very careful with how you use technology, especially in early years. Early years is going to be very critical how you're going to use technology for whatever you want to deliver. It's addictive. I keep giving this example. If you've seen a child watching television, and television is a form of technology, although nowadays online classes seem to be replacing that. But everybody looks at television, and if you see a child watching like a cartoon for 30 minutes, and you just shake him up and ask him his name, and just intense, they watched it for 30 minutes, and you just shake him up and say, just tell me your name. It'll take them a couple of seconds to really react. I mean, like, they'll be like so zonked out. The fact is that technology does have debilitating effects. I think there's a small poll there. Maybe I should just wait for the poll results before I actually go into saying my views on technology.
Sure, sure. I think let's wait for to hear what people
Sorry,
think
guys.
about it.
Just a small poll on what we think about the online learning that's happening around and how effective it has been for all of you, especially if you have a 6-year-old and a below 6-year-old in your house. Yeah, kind of reflects what it is. Um, So I think the results speak for itself in a lot of ways. I have to talk about the role of technology in early years. So this is specific to online learning. I think technology is a lot more than just online learning. Online learning is one component of technology where we're just doing classes where the teachers are taking online classes. But that's just a content delivery platform the way you look at it. But technology is not a silver bullet. It is an enabler. It's a lot of what Mridula talked about in terms of core learning and supplementary learning. I think technology falls for me in the supplementary learning category. A lot of things can be achieved with technology post the core learning is done. I don't think core learning can be delivered through technology, especially in early years. Children need to do and learn, to play and learn. They need to actually physically do activities, and that's the best form of learning. Once that learning is in place, you can introduce technology in a lot of ways to supplement that learning. If you have introduced place value system through a material where a child can actually learn place value system, they can identify 1,209 9 tens and 5 units, then you can actually play a lot of games. You can do a lot of which is what we do in Credo. We actually get the child to play first with a physical material, learn that, and then introduce technology as a complement to practice and kind of reinforce the concept. But you can't deliver core learning through technology. That's a firm belief. Technology is a great enabler to teacher training, to enable to enable the ecosystem. So learning for teachers to ensure that we can actually train teachers better. I think technology has a great role to play. Technology has a great role to play in assessments. Again, through these gamified mechanisms, if we can actually identify where children are struggling, if I have taught place value system through, if I have got the child to play with a material and learn place value system, but when I actually assess him on a game, he's not able to understand it, we figure that out. Can we then revisit that activity and ensure the child kind of remedial is given to the child so that he kind of makes sure that he learns that concept. So technology is a great role to play in figuring out what the child has learned, what he's not, and so that the remedials can be provided. Technology is a great tool for teachers. It's a great tool for repetitive activities that you can do once the core learning is placed. But I don't think it can deliver core learning, and especially as I say in early years. In early years, it needs to be play and learn. I have a very small video I want to just show you. I'll just share my screen. This is just quickly showing you how a child has actually learned through play first, and then they've actually gone to actually doing it on the screen or on the books. So this is a child, and this is an affordable private school child, a child from a lower income community in an affordable private school, actually doing what we call as a place value system. That's a material where they just quickly learn 1, 10, 100, and 1,000. And this, once you've introduced, we actually get them to learn. In the next, we actually get them to play a game like this, which then reinforces the concept. This is actually on the mobile. This is a technology-based game for them to do identify hundreds, units, and tens. The physical form of the product you've already seen is exactly the same, and the representational form of the product in the game kind of reinforces that learning for the child. And then after you do this, if you can then take them to a representational sheet, which is now telling you how place value system is delivered. This is like now, which is in hundreds, is 900, 925, it's 900. So the child has actually played and learned. They've actually reinforced that through a practice, through a game. And then now they've come to a physical worksheet where they can actually do a place value concept. So this is a simple example of how we take the child from concrete to abstract. Mridula mentioned it. This is what we mean by a concrete to abstract learning. So if this is done in a proper way, I think technology can help. It's an enabler in a lot of ways. Even this worksheet, for example, can be digitized to a large extent and delivered. But you can't expect the child to learn place value system if you just give the sheet. If you think if you just give the sheet and they'll learn place value system, that is not going to happen. They may learn it through rote value, but rote learning, they may just by heart it. The teachers may fill in a lot of the answers as a lot of teachers do in schools nowadays, but you wouldn't have the child actually understanding place value system. So the concrete learning, the physical learning, the first activity based learning needs to happen. Then you can actually introduce all these. So that's the way we look at technology. Technology needs to be an enabler. It has its role to play, but it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to be the be all and the end all that will change this world.
I think learning is also a social process largely, so that element's always going to be missing where if you're online purely. Of course, you can create mechanisms where you build communities and all, but it's for young children, it's still not the same thing. They need their friends sitting next to them, and while intellectual learning is happening, socialization has to happen parallelly for them. It's not two separate processes largely.
Yeah, I think great. Kind of completely agree, right? Technology has to play the role of an enabler. At least in early childhood education, you need to have that touch and feel for a kid to really understand the concept. But yeah, I mean, I really like the way you kind of explained it, how you guys have integrated technology, right, along with the physical pieces or the entire, thing to kind of give them a holistic experience and evaluate the learning outcomes. I mean, before we move ahead, I'm kind of cognizant of the time we have. Just quick question, right? I think we all have kind of heard your thoughts on, what are the outcomes, what can be done to do it, and all that. I think the biggest question is a lot of people, and I mean, I'm specifically interested in hearing this from you, given that you guys have been working with a lot of budget schools, right? So, I mean, how do you really take care of these outcomes while still doing it in a very affordable way, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How do you think people can achieve these outcomes while still kind of remaining profitable or affordable?
Yeah, I think, and there's also a question from one of the audience about how we can, end the poverty affordably. So possibly this will answer part of that as well. There are two, three things that you need to always keep cognizant of. One is whenever a school invests in anything, they need to think about it being a sustainable process. Right? If you keep investing in something new every year there's a lot of money that's wasted in just setting the system right. So choose wisely and make sure you pick a sustainable one, which you know is going to give you the right learning outcomes. That's something we keep telling schools. With Credo, we've been lucky. There's been an acceptance and buy-in, and people keep continuing. So they keep seeing the benefits. In the second year, the third year, the learning outcomes are even better. So once you invest, you need to sustain learning to make sure that your costs are kept limited to a large extent. The second thing, of course, which Mani already mentioned in detail, so I won't go into depth, is productized learning. You don't keep investing in human capital. We know teacher attrition is high in a lot of places. So every year you're investing into teacher training and so on. You need to make sure that teacher is a guide and not the sole delivery mechanism for learning. And that can happen in early years very easily via play. I think this time the government has also taken a lot of initiatives to say play-based learning. We've been hearing seminars, a lot of seminars about the right focus on play-based learning. It can change the way costing works in early years, right? So you have the same tool, you can use it for 7, 8 years with 200 children, and hence the cost drop down drastically. The third thing which we've noticed, which schools burnt a lot of money on earlier, 10 years back, they are a little wiser now, is they used to buy a lot of piecemeal solutions. Somebody will come and say, I have a language program, I have a maths program, and they try everything because schools are also desperate to somehow make learning change. They are very, very committed to make learning change if they think it's doable. So the one thing we've always found hasn't worked very well. I won't say it's a complete washout, but yeah, it really has its drawback is to pick things, books is low, period game is low. Then you take different components from different people, and the school has the horrendous job of stitching it all together to make the program work. So what has worked for us very well is that we are an integrated program. So when a school signs up with Credo, they have nothing else. They give us 4 walls, they give us the classroom, they tell us these are our teachers, and everything that has to change in early learning is our responsibility. Whether it's books, whether it's teacher training, whether it's the lab, whether it's the materials, all of that becomes our responsibility, which gives them significant cost advantage, and they don't have the headache of tying it on in all together. This produces economies of scale for them as well. So the more admissions they have, because the process is good, now they're able to deliver even better learning at lower costs. Right? And the best people to do it, in our opinion, has always been the private players, the affordable private school. The reason we're so fascinated with this market is here you have a willing entrepreneur who wants to make that change with you. He's doing it at really low cost. It's not as much of a government school or an NGO. I know it's tougher on both those because accountability needs to be there when you want to make education change, and that's best found in the private enterprise. So we have the private enterprise, we have a player like us, so many other vendors who are here to make the system change, and this works very well. This is a great partnership that works very well. I think the cost of education in public education is significantly higher than what we find in the budget private schools. At fees as low as 20,000 rupees per annum, this person's actually able to invest into something like Credo and make a change and do it profitably at the end of the day. versus more than 50,000 rupees per child almost spent on education alone. The cost of nutrition and education together in the public education system is, I think it crosses six figures in most states. So at that price, one-fifth of that price, this guy is delivering education in a much better and much simpler format, so it becomes really affordable. If you look at a wish list for me, it would be for the government to play more the role of an auditor and really privatize education largely, give people coupons, go study where you want to study, and let the market choose. The best school wins, and that way the market drives quality education even more. So that would be a wish list for me.
Yeah, and just adding on to what Madhula just said, so the point is a lot of us don't know the statistics. We always equate, and a lot of us in the affluent section of society always equate schools as those rich schools that our children go to, or the premium schools that our children go to, and we think they are the norm. They are actually what is driving, and they are getting a lot of bad name in the papers today, in the press. Oh, they're collecting full fees in the pandemic time, and a lot of angry parents out there saying this is not right. But what we don't understand is the fact that in India, that forms a measly 0.1% of the total private schools in the country. There are 300,000 private schools and 350,000 private schools in this country, out of which hardly 10,000 of them are the premium segment. The majority of these private schools are schools that charge between 5,000 and 25,000 rupees annual fees. They are the majority of the country studies there. 50% of India studies in affordable private schools. 70% of urban children study in affordable private schools. And these are schools that charge very low fees. Your next door auto driver, your person who's probably a vegetable vendor's child is most probably sending his child to an affordable private school, because every parent wants the private education because public education is not delivered. And these are the schools we are talking about which can actually make the change. They are the low hanging fruit. You ask the question of how it can be done affordably. There is your answer. These affordable private schools have been in existence for 50 years now, are probably the reason where education has actually moved ahead in India. And I think we need to kind of move it forward, help them along. And we are there to ensure that these schools deliver. And they are very market driven, like Nidla said, because their competition, to be honest, is not you and me. It's actually the government schools. A parent who comes to an affordable private school is probably putting 1 month of his salary, like 20,000 rupees of salary, for his child's education, and he's questioning the school, saying that I can't teach my child, I don't know English, I'm not educated, my child needs to be educated. And I have the option of putting my child in a government school where the education is free. I'm paying 20,000 rupees to you, you better deliver. So this affordable private school, private entrepreneur is heavily under pressure to deliver. Every parent asks him questions on how he's going to deliver the education, and they're trying their best. So they do invest in solution like ours, and we actually make it affordable for them. So we kind of make sure that all this is done very affordably so that they can deliver in turn the affordable education that they need to provide to their parents. So I think it's possible. The examples are out there. The infrastructure is already out there. It just needs a little bit of mind space to ensure that there is not so much of bureaucratic uh, curtailing of these efforts that are happening in this country. Uh, if that can be done, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of stuff that we can do.
Got it, got it. So I think, Mani, if I could summarize, right, I think effectively what you're saying is that two things which can help you reduce cost. One is, kind of go with an integrated player who could potentially provide you everything. So one, you save a lot of time and energy on kind of, integrating different pieces, which, as a preschool you have obtained from different players, and some of them, sometimes they are not even in sync, right, which is time where you also end up wasting a lot of cost. Second, if I could understand it, is also that, potentially leverage a private player who has done extensive work in the early childhood education space, and has already probably picked up best practices from various preschools or various schools with which they have been working, in addition to their own experience and their own research, and leverage that to also improve the outcomes without really incurring any additional cost. I think these two things could really help up.
Yeah. So, for example, when we started working with affordable private schools, we were shocked, right? I mean, to be honest, we were shocked. So we were never clear. Like 4 years back, 5 years back, when we took Prero to affordable private schools, we were wondering, will these schools actually pay, the per child cost? So we charge about 1,500 rupees per child, and we were wondering, is this a feasible solution for them? And we were shocked. Most of these private schools are actually affordable private schools, are actually buying books in the market where they pay anywhere between 2,000 to 2,500 just for the books. There's no solution tied to that. It's just books that they buy 2,000 to 2,500 because they want to provide that high quality education to their parents. And here we actually go in and say that for that same amount, not only are you going to provide you books or whatever you need, it's a complete solution that will ensure your child learns better. That's a focus. At the end of the day, I think the school exists for learning outcome improvement, and we all should remember that. And when we say learning outcomes, like you rightly said, it's not test. It's not tests. It's not again and again coming back to how many marks you scored. It's about at the end of the day, are these guys employable? Are these guys having foundational skills? And that's going to be a focus. So learning outcome, to be honest, why do we have tests at the end of the year? It's the most silliest thing. Tests should be done in the middle of the year so that whatever backlogs whatever
Absolutely.
you found to be wrong, you actually correct it in the second half. What's the point in doing a test in March and saying the child is bad at this or good at this? I mean, what's the point? And you move on to the next
And
second
then push them to a more difficult
more
topic.
difficult portion. Already the child has not done what he's supposed to do in the previous year. You've taken him to the next year in a different portion. So
Right? It's like building a house with a very weak foundation.
yeah,
Bound to
you already don't have first
collapse.
second.
Got it. Great. I think there are a lot of questions which I think you guys are already answering in parallel. Before I move on, and I think I would probably take my last question, which is also kind of an overlap with another question which one of the attendees had, is how do you really see the impact of COVID on early childhood education? How do you see the recovery happening? And more importantly, I think kind of linking it with one of the questions from the attendee, right? I think a lot of kids, I mean, unfortunately, because parents do not have enough avenue to keep these kids occupied, right? They do not have an option but to let the kids watch cartoon or TV or anything, right? So kind of increase screen time. So one of the attendees has a question: what do you think cartoon watching more than an hour doing to kids' brain and behavior? Right? I mean, I would probably want you to club the two, in addition to the COVID response, and probably answer both of them.
I think COVID has produced a lot of online learning channels. What it has also, of course, it's completely cut off the social process of the child, which is a huge hit. Anything in small doses is fine. I don't think today we're at a point where we can say do away with the television or the gadget. That needs to be in limited doses. We do know that it has a very delimiting, effect on the child's mind. The ability to think spontaneously, all of those, while there is some absorption of data going on, the ability to think back is definitely a huge hit in early years. For us, COVID was, of course, a huge wipeout with both the budget private schools and the preschools have paid a very, very heavy price for it. Children are just not learning anymore. We had to be very innovative about coming up with a solution where we came up with a toy box that could be sent home because we were racking our brains to see how activity-based learning can be sent home. Finally, we packaged everything into like a miniature lab and said, no, we're not agreeing to only online learning. Even if online engagement has to happen, if that's the social medium, so be it, because there's no choice. The teacher has to do some social engagement with a group of children. However, what is very critical is the child doesn't lose the touch and feel thing, because once you lose that habit, it's very difficult to bring the child back. So excessive fantasy, usage and excessive cartoons. We've seen some in specific children. We've seen some damaging effects. We had a child in our school which we were running, where the parent had given a lot of mythology stories with like, okay, it's culture and things, but it went to a point where the child started losing interest in the day-to-day life and said, okay, if I'm not Hanuman, I'm not exciting enough because I'm just a boring human being. So we can't let online education or fantasy go down to that level. It needs to be moderated very judiciously.
I think COVID has probably, I don't know if there's any other sector which is worst impacted. Maybe tourism is probably the only one I would say, but there also there's some hope of recovery. I think in early childhood, it's probably the worst impacted, whether it's the institutions that deliver these learning. Anganwadis have been closed for the last 1 year. Preschools are 50% of the preschools in the country are, by any estimate. I mean, people are just doing random estimates that have closed permanently, probably will never open again. Budget private schools are seeing 10% enrollment in early years. They do have some enrollments in class 5 onwards, but parents in early years it's completely given up and not doing anything in the early years. So I think we're probably the worst affected. Our problem is, given the importance of early childhood, we keep saying this: 1 year in early childhood is equal to 10 years of your life. This 1 year we have lost is going to have a generational impact. I mean, we won't see it. Probably we'll all gloss over it. Look at it 10 years down the line, and you will see the results of this. You will see a generational impact on this, especially in the lower income communities. I mean, we all talk about it. In the higher income, we still got away with it. We still have some kind of ability at home to kind of engage the child. a lot of lower income parents where both the parents are gone to work, children are at home, they are actually having nothing to do. They've gone into gadget addictions and all kinds of problems. Not just, it's not happened in even higher income communities. I'm not saying it's not happened there, but it's still work from home and all that. Parents have been able to, take care of it. In lower income communities, they don't have the ability to work from home. So, I mean, we run a factory where we have employ 170 people, so we know how much it has impacted. I think it's a generational impact. We're going to see the results of it. Like Mridula said, we've been trying our best to see how we can get learning at home. So, which is where you saw we've gone into the technology-based gaming platform, but with physical learning. So, always, can we get a toy box out there? Can children play and learn first, then get them into some kind of meaningful games, not random videos that they watch like nursery rhymes or cartoons which they keep watching all the time. Can we get them to do some meaningful activities? Is been the focus of our kind of empowering parents and preschools, and we want to do it through the preschools and schools, because at the end of the day you need the guiding light of a teacher or somebody telling you how it needs to be done. And if you have that, then it's going to really make a difference. So yeah, but the impact is phenomenal. I mean, it's probably one of the worst impacted sectors if you look at it from even from the future point of view, what this will cost in the future. So tourism industry, maybe a few jobs lost, and then they will regain it back a year down the line. But you're going to look at it, the impact that this is going to have on a child's life is going to be long-term impact. So that's a fear we have.
Yeah, I think very true. Yeah, I mean, at least at early childhood education, very difficult for technology to replicate the physical space. The entire activity-based learning which these kids are kind of part of. Regarding the other question, right? I think about cartoon watching doing to kids' brain and behavior. I think Mridula just answered. I think to a certain extent we have to allow that exposure, but I think overdoing it is always very harmful. I mean, it's not just cartoon. Even like watching stories or getting too much into that can lead kids to kind of think of very
Anything has to
special
be
circumstances.
I mean, it has to be in moderate doses, because especially in early childhood, you have to remember, we all forget it, children have capacities for absorption which are unbelievable. You and I can't believe how much the child can absorb in early years, how much they can learn. If you don't give them the right doses and the right inputs in the right doses, you're going to have a problem of, like she said, the balanced diet. You're going to have issues. You're going to have too much cartoon, too much YouTube, too much nursery rhymes, too many stories. You're going to have issues all the time. You need to give a balanced diet of the whole thing.
Absolutely. I think there's another question which is a very interesting and a relevant one, right? I think given the current situation where we all agree that there is a challenge, right, with early childhood education because everything is online, right? I mean, any thoughts on how we can at least minimize the impact or minimize the adverse impact on kids? I mean, how do we really make up for that loss of physical time? Who really can take care of these practical activities?
So the way we look at it is while the parents have to do it at home and the parent does have a role to play, if it's gaming, like as simple as snake and ladder, it's not rocket science. Anybody can play snake and ladder. We, for example, have a snake and ladder game in our toy box, which is combined with a place value system. So every time the child rolls the die, the child is collecting units. Whenever they reach a 10, they exchange 10 units for a 10, which becomes an absolutely fantastic way for a child to say 21 is equal to 2 tens and 1 unit. It's as simple as that. Now the child can play with the neighbor's child, the child can play with the sibling, but the parent has to introduce it once to the child. And we have been pushing schools to send activity-based learning home. So while we're not a direct B2C company largely, and a lot of parents do pick up things from us, but we have been largely pushing schools to implement better learning, and we've been encouraging them to send toy boxes home and supplement that with other things, because there's nothing you can do if there is a safe environment where the neighbor's child can come over and play, or you have two kids at home, then it's great. You can have the gamified physical learning. It's not the best thing. The children do need 30 other children to learn with, but hey, right now there's nothing else you can do. So that's just what you can do to mitigate the effects of online education. Blended learning is what is the need of the day, if at all. So you have to have your practical, you can have a little bit of your online, you have to have your offline learning as well. And whenever school starts, you need to keep the child mentally agile to make sure the child is not emotionally down or socially cut off to an extent where it becomes unrecoverable. That would be the biggest fear. So we need to keep that social engagement going.
And I mean, I know this will be a little controversial, but I think, world over, the first things to open, as I say, any country, you would say the first thing that opens is a preschool. In our country, it's the first thing that closes and the last thing to open. I think put in SOPs in place. I think start working towards a specific. I think the request to the government is to give clarity on how we can do it. It's not like you won't get a COVID in a restaurant. You're not going to get COVID in a bar. You're not going to get COVID in a cinema hall. I mean,
At the IPL match.
in an IPL match, you can get it in a stadium. I mean, you're allowing children to go there. So at the end of the day, I think it needs to be that education has to be prioritized. I think that's my request. I mean, it's a humble request. A lot of parents might not agree with me on this. I've had discussions and arguments on this, but the fact of the matter is, we need to prioritize education. And yes, we need to put SOPs in place. Maybe it's like, 10 children at any time, 5 children at any time, maybe fight for, if you have a preschool which is running with 40 children, can we at least have 10 children coming in the 3 rooms, segregated as much as possible, but with some amount of interaction, and put in a lot of SOPs on how they can come in. They're doing it globally. It's being done. It's not impossible. I mean, it's just putting your mind to it instead of trying to say that it will never be possible. We just completely close our thoughts, right? I mean, the moment this kind of proposed anywhere, immediately, hey, ho nahi sakta, chote bacche ko control nahi kar payenge. I'm sorry. I mean, that's a very defeatist attitude, because the consequences of this are now, and we all know data proves that the small children are the least affected by this disease. Yes, they can carry it back. The fear is, will they carry it back home? But that fear is there for everything. Today I'm at work, am I going to carry back an illness back home? I may carry it back to my child also. So I don't know that. So at the end of the day, I think punishing children for this is the last thing to do. Angela Merkel said this in Germany. She said, we can't sacrifice our present for the future. I mean, we can't sacrifice our future for the present. She said that. We just said that I cannot shut down schools. And she shut down schools as a last resort. She said, I will not sacrifice my future. That's very important. The present can take care of itself. We will ensure that schools run as long as possible. I would just request that from the government, because at the drop of a hat, the first thing that gets closed in this country is a school. There's a preschool, and preschools are the last. In fact, they get closed even before the bigger schools. So I think that's something that needs to be done. It's important. I hope people realize it, because if it's too late and you're going to lose one more year, we're talking about a second wave now, one more year, my God, I mean, it's the impacts are going to be phenomenal.
Absolutely. Fair point. I think that's very helpful. I think there are just 2 more questions left. I think one is Pooja wants to know what's the cost of implementing Credo at school. I think we can come to that at the end. The other one is, I mean, you can probably answer both together. The other one is Rameshri wanting to know, why are you guys not operating in the B2C mode?
So 150 million children below the age of 6, that's going to be a huge challenge for us. Hence, the vehicle for us to deliver learning in our heads has always been school. I know home learning is the need of the hour. It's happening, but it would be great if schools can implement home learning, because we can't make it happen for every single parent across the country. Yes, we are still doing it. In fact, a lot of parents do ask us, and we do take some special requests, and they buy materials from us and get it done. But at the end of the day, a teacher is needed to guide your learning even at home. Then it makes it a little more structured. We are strong believers and fans of a structured learning program. Learning to subjugate, it will happen. But when it can be structured, the child builds that structure into the mind. The structure is not for the teacher or for you, it is for the child. So we are strong believers that hence the school is the best delivery vehicle and not B2C. I wouldn't want my child to be learning just B2C and just do a little social engagement outside and come. As I keep repeating, learning is a social process by itself. So they need to learn with other children in the school, and I am a staunch believer of that. And hence, no, B2C is not something that's been on our mind, as a direct solution. Yeah, the cost of implementing Credo is very, very affordable for schools. We provide our solutions for any ranging between 5 to 10,000, depending on various combinations of solutions that we have, with the toy box, with the books, with the planners. Signing up today for a school with a Credo school, partner school, is not at all expensive. We have so many partners implementing our solutions. I know they made it very affordable for the parents. For as low as 15 to 18,000, you can have the entire year's learning program delivered to your house, monitored by a teacher, mentored by a guidance facilitator. And yeah, we do have a lot of partner schools. So anybody who's interested, we are happy to put them in touch with our partner schools.
And just adding on to that, why not B2C? Again, strong believers in the fact that we are not here to just make a profit or to actually do this. I think Mudula and all of us believe that we want to make a change in the early education space and in the education space as a whole. I keep saying this all the time. You have some phenomenal amount of money going into the after school space. You have Byju's and Vedanta, so many companies getting funded billions of dollars, right? At the end of the day, think about it. Though in a normal day, in a normal, let's say post-COVID world, you're looking at a child being 8 hours in school, 9 hours, probably including traveling time, 10 hours in school. And then there's like the $1 billion being pumped into like a 1 hour after school session that the child goes through. But there's no question being asked that the 8 to 10 hours the child spends in actually the school hours, how much of learning is it achieved? Why do you need that 1 hour after school if the school can deliver what it needs to deliver? Can we make sure the schools are empowered to deliver what they need to deliver? Do you need that 1 hour extra? Instead, the child could probably going down and playing football or cricket rather than actually being engaged with the Byju's at the end of the year. I mean, this is my thought again, controversial, but that's the way I believe in it. 1 hour after school getting so much of attention when you can actually do so much more in the 8 hours at school. Can we empower schools to deliver better? That's our focus. That should be our focus. And if more organizations, more people come together in ensuring more delivery happens at schools, that's the way to go forward. Direct at home. And there was a question on homeschooling here. I think earlier somebody had asked about homeschooling.
Yeah.
And that's a fad that has taken on in the US. And a lot of people are also following it in India. To be honest, like Mridula said, again, it's learning is a social process. There's only so much you can do at homeschooling at home. You can spend all your time with your child and be very focused and dedicated. But if the child doesn't have that peer learning happening with other children of the same age, similar mentality, and the challenges it faces, like maybe bullying and stuff that they need to overcome, that's life learning for you. That's life skills that they deliver, and that cannot happen with home learning. You have to have a social environment for it, and that social process is very, very critical.
Absolutely. I think just one last session before we wrap up. I mean, just your thoughts on something which I think could potentially be done by schools. I mean, what are your thoughts if, preschools or schools pool up all the activity kits and the material they have, right? And kind of start sending it to kids' home, let's say on a rotational basis, and potentially take session where they educate parents, right, along with teachers on how they can use this. I mean, we don't have an option right now, but probably situations like these potentially require us to innovate and think beyond what is happening. I mean, yes, there is a risk of parent potentially damaging it or not receiving, but I think those things can be better managed with education. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think some of the Montessori schools are doing it already. So they take it back and then they wipe it clean and then they send it to the next child, because Montessori just cannot function without materials. In fact, the toy box itself, that was the reason it came up, because we made it so affordable. We don't want to get into this junket when the school doesn't want to take the trouble of doing something like this, which is a great suggestion. They can definitely rotate things like a library amongst the children. And for schools who don't want to take that, I mean, the toy box for us, we made it as affordably as for 3,000 rupees. So for the entire year, you have 100 activities, everything bundled in a timetable for the child. So both of which are great ideas. If you can reach activity-based learning home somehow, yeah, it is a bit of effort from the parent side to make it happen, but it's better than online learning only. It's just pure technology, and this would still have some purpose. The child will do something with it. The child will explore, discover, and learn, as we say. So that would be the best thing that happens to this child.
Absolutely. Great. I think thanks a lot. Those were probably the questions which we had, I think even from the attendees. I think, Sandeep, if you don't have any further questions, we could potentially wrap up the session. I would really want to thank, both Mridula and Mani for your time and your thoughts. Definitely a very enlightening session for me, for sure, both as a parent and as somebody who has been in the K9 space. Of course, we don't look at so much in the early education space. We kind of look at it from senior KG to 9. But yeah, definitely something which I strongly believe in, your thoughts. And I think your passion towards education education and improving outcomes is very, very kind of evident. So thanks a lot for your time. It was really helpful and a very, very informative session.
Thanks, Mikin. Thanks, Sandeep.
Thanks, Mikin, for having us. It was great being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you to all the audience. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone for attending the session.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.